The Montreal Labour Council of the CSN, which is one of the labour centrals in Quebec, has been very supportive of Quebec Solidaire, I would say practically from its beginning. And we expect that it will continue that support. The Montreal Labour Council is holding a meeting this coming 19th of March, and I think they will repeat the support which they gave us in 2012, 2008, and 2007. But it's the only part of the CSN that has come out officially in support of Quebec Solidaire or some of its candidates. A new development, which I think is potentially of enormous importance, is the fact that the Montreal Labour Council of the Quebec Federation of Labour just did so last week. It was a very important debate. 6 of our candidates, which come from Quebec Federation of Labour, were at that meeting, and 2 resolutions were adopted by a big majority. One, support from the Montreal Labour Council for the 6 candidates of Quebec Solidaire, which come from its ranks, and second one was a strong denunciation of Pierre-Carl Pelado joining the Parti Québécois as an out-and-out betrayal of the working class and of principles of trade union solidarity. So that's very important because we're seeing the beginning of a breakdown in that kind of alliance which has existed for over 30 years between the labor leadership and the Parti Québécois. As far as sovereignty and independence, Quebec Solidaire has attempted from the beginning to link the two through the term of national liberation. In other words, we conceive of Quebec's sovereignty and Quebec's moving beyond capitalism as a fight which is one and the same. In other words, we do not believe in a stage of sovereignty then eventually followed by a stage which would lead to overcoming capitalism, but linking the two in a very coherent and systematic manner. We have tried to make this as concrete as we could by putting forward the proposal of a constituent assembly. As you know, in Latin America, constituent assembly were used to great effect in both Venezuela, Bolivia, Guatemala, etc. So our concept of the constituent assembly would be to create a large public debate which would unite as many layers of Quebec, as many social layers, as many social groups as possible around both a social and a sovereign Quebec. Eventually, for some of us who are on the left, it's a socialist Quebec. For Quebec Solidaire at this stage, it's an anti-neoliberal Quebec. But that's how we are trying to link it. It's a difficult debate. It's not easy because we're attacked continuously, not only by the right-wing nationalists, but more and more by the left wing of the PQ, which has gone totally berserk over the past month. And the reason why they're accusing us of siding with Muslim extremists is 2. One, because obviously one of our leaders is of Iranian origin, Amir Kadir. I mean, he comes out of a long background of opposing the mullahs in Iran. But nonetheless, because he's of Iranian origin, he's accused by them of being a Muslim extremist. 1, racism, of course. And secondly, because we have opposed the charter. So if you oppose the charter and criticize the racist aspect of the charter, because it's an anti-Islamic charter, and it's designed to create sort of a right-wing nationalist backlash in Quebec, automatically you're a Muslim extremist.
Yeah, I'll be brief, although I'm going to say I'm from South Louisiana, so when you win, I want you to federate us. But very briefly on the Green question, in the U.S., you know, I mean, the Green Party, well, in the first place, it's not a class party. And it also comes together around an organizing model that I just don't think works. And it's that electoral model, right? And that's the Green model, like a third-party organizing model. So you know, the whole time the Labour Party was around, we had overtures about merging with the Greens, and we just say, can't you see we're doing different things? But I mean, this is another tendency within the American left, right? Just to want everybody to get together, right? So I mean, that's my bit about how I connect with the Greens there. Paul, on your comment, I mean, what can you say? Yeah, I mean, it's a long-term deal. And once you figure out that, among other characteristics for capitalism, that the crisis is the cure, which just gives them the occasion, gives the bourgeoisie the occasion to reshuffle the deck over and over and restart the game of enclosure right as soon as they finish the last one. Then yeah. Well, my friends and I sometimes reach for phrases like "think like a revolutionary," but have to act like a social democrat on a daily basis, and that's just the curse that we have. So. I mean, Olivia, you've got more to say about this.
I take Paul's very profound point very seriously. I was in El Salvador in 1994 or 5, just as it was turning itself from a guerrilla army into a political party. And I witnessed a conversation between a guy who later became the presidential candidate for Cumbre Guardado, who had been the subcomandante on the San Salvador volcano, and a woman who was heading up the educational program for the party that I've been invited to come to. And he said the trouble with the party at the moment is that we think of the long term as the next presidential election. In fact, that's the short term. And that was coming up in 1999, I think, 4 years later. That is the short term. The medium term would be 2010, when we hope to have enough of a membership base to become a powerful force in the social formation. And the long term is 2020, when we might come into office with enough power behind us to actually do something. And she said, I'm then leaving the party. I can't tell people who've been engaged in the Civil War since 1981, an enormous sacrifice, that they have to wait until 2020. And here you face the problem. You face the problem that you can only win mass support if you're able to give people concrete reforms, or at least show them the way to win concrete reforms, be an agency of winning concrete reforms. So the trick is, in what way can one build enough by going into the state, win enough, and use the state enough to organize the unorganized outside the state. So you're building their strength. And develop the kinds of reforms that Gord's called structural reforms, which are oriented to going beyond those limits of reforms as they're contained by bourgeois opposition and just the structure of the system, of the capitalist system. And that is very difficult. But I think the way Paul is framing the question means that we need the kind of strategic thinking, and I don't think there's been enough of it in the Marxist tradition, to try to see that through, certainly not in the social democratic tradition. And that brings me to the problem with the Green parties. I think that the Green parties have precisely opted, for an interpretation of the ecological crisis in terms of catastrophism, as Adolf was saying yesterday, which is that we've only got 5 or 10 years left. And that's the way they seek to build support, precisely in terms of we need to do the fundamental things now, right, in order to stop the destruction of the planet. There's a turnaround time we can't go beyond. And I think that can win support, but it has the same kind of false opportunism attached to it that Marxist predictions of the final crisis have always done. So that's one problem with it. The second is that they're increasingly oriented to market solutions, because within neoliberalism, those are the only types of solutions you can win in the short run. So they're opting for carbon trading as their solution to the climate crisis, right? Which is derivatives, essentially. And thirdly, unlike their promise from the German Greens in the 70s, which was that they were going to be engaging in ultra-democratic internal politics, whereby MPs that were elected, delegates that were elected would be subject to recall, there would be turnover of representatives, etc. None of them practice that anymore. Those are called the Fundis in Germany now, who are totally marginalized or outside of the strongest of the Green parties in the world, as opposed to the Realos, who are the Blairistes in the Green parties.
Paul's question and your question, kind of linked. Yeah, you're right. I mean, the liberal non-left or the liberal left wing or whatever the hell they call themselves of the Democratic Party has basically had shit fits, right, about this critique. But they don't represent anything, right? I mean, they're basically a supplicant wing, right? I mean, and I should hold on that. There are the interest groups, right? I mean, there are liberal interest groups that operate in their silos, who are dependent, right? Or they're cue takers from the Democratic Party. Trumka and the leadership of the AFL-CIO are also cue takers from the Democratic Party. So it's not, and I mean, this is maybe something that's distinct about, I mean, the Democrats or the present political alignments in the U.S. I mean, distinct within North America more broadly. But I mean, so what there is outside of well-intentioned, good-hearted individual leftists in small groups here, there, and everywhere, are the liberal intelligentsia or opinion-setting and ratifying elements, like in the nation and the republic and whatnot, who don't have an institutional base. They don't represent anybody, really. They bloviate on the internet. And, I mean, the labor movement is still what there is, right, institutionally in American politics. And the response is always coming from the left as well, yeah, but it's small, it's in decline. But I always say, all right, compared to what? Right, so what else you got? Right? And I think this speaks to the long Duray question too. I mean, one of the things that I took away from the Labor Party experience is how many other people there are out there, like in our cohort, like us, with our kind of politics, who have become institutionally significant players in the trade union movement. And that's what the backbone of the Labor Party project was, right? And those people are still there, right? So the question then is how it becomes possible, whether it becomes possible, to move sections of the trade union movement in a direction, first of all, that leads toward considering breaking from the Democratic Party and adopting something that looks more like an independently determined working class program. Now, what that would mean if it could happen, and I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm not saying it's on the threshold of happening. But if it could happen, it still would be something that opens to a lot of yes buts, right? Right, because they're like this kind of politics. So as to Obama, look, I mean, already, right, the line is being set by these liberals, right? It's the same story over and over again. Yes. Now, what's interesting about this time around, I'll stop after this, is that what talking points that have formed among the liberals around this critique is that, well, yeah, what he says might have been true at some point in the past, but there's this new thing coming on the horizon, right? There's the Elizabeth Warren wing of the Democratic Party. The fast food organizing is about to break forward, and it's always the same kind of thing, right? That there's something that we as insiders know that's going to change the game. But it's interesting though that they are all they're by and large saying, well, yeah, it might have been true, up until like week before last, but there's some new shit happening now.
It's difficult to answer all this in three minutes, so I'll just try to give you a quick example, which I think might clarify something. From May 20th to about June 2nd in 2012, there were nightly demonstrations in Quebec, mostly in Montreal, involving literally tens of thousands of people. Now, when I was involved in building a revolutionary party in the 1970s, with Herman here, by the way. I mean, we used to dream of the fact that tens of thousands of people would stream out of the working class areas night after night to overthrow the bourgeoisie. Never saw it then, but we saw it this time. But what is interesting to see is the areas of Montreal where these incredible mass demonstrations happen, were areas where the left has been working for 40 years. 40 years. Now, none of us could have ever dreamt or dreamed that this would happen, particularly at this time during the student strike, but the work that you do, the organizing work, the structural work, the patient work, the difficult work, the unending, unceasing work which doesn't seem to go anywhere, sometimes does pay off. Now, after this movement, here we are a year and a half, 2 years later, and a lot of the young activists say, whither the Maple Spring? Where is that incredible, massive mobilization of people that we saw back then? And would it have been possible to overthrow the system 2 years ago? No, I don't think it would have been possible. However, if out of this we can structure an organization, a socialist organization, that can take advantage of whatever structural limits you can get within the states, within the structure of the capitalist state, but at the same time widen those parameters and explode them when you can by mass movements, maybe that's the way forward. Thank you.
Maybe we ought to, I think we definitely ought to continue this discussion and all of the questions that were raised. Obviously, really need some really good debate and discussion. I think Omar is absolutely right that this isn't a matter of blaming the Communist Party or its activists or its leaders. Adolf and I were just talking about how, and it is his Harper's piece and his book that's going to come out soon shows it all the more, that the exemplary practice, organizing practice of the Communist Party around the race class Achilles heel of the American working class is what needs to be emulated and what needs to be cast aside finally is the politics we've all engaged in, which is the politics of adding up identities rather than building the class and enriching them through the diversity of the class. But we've all done this, and the CP deserves enormous credit for having done it. That said, and I think the failure of the Trotskyist parties lies in this, in their attempt, and they produced marvelous cadre, some of whom are in this room, was that they founded their politics on the Bolshevik Revolution. Both the Communist parties and the Trotskyist parties. And that was the be-all and end-all of their existence. That was their guiding lodestar. I think we're past that now. We're lucky to be past it. It's not around. It's an enormous anvil off our backs. It's not to say we don't want to learn from it. But that it can't be the lodestar of our rhetoric, of our strategic orientation, etc. The other questions are so big, but maybe in terms of the structural limitations that any party would face getting into government is that Quebec Solidaire and even Syriza should hope that they don't get into quickly.
Good point.
Because the international balance of forces isn't there, let alone the domestic one, to give them the breathing room to be able to introduce structural reforms. And there are people in Syriza who think that way. And therefore build the strategic capacity, the base, etc., to be able to actually do something once you get in. On the other hand, Syriza wouldn't be where it is if it hadn't said, our goal is to form a government in this crisis and to help people get out of this crisis. So it's a terrific contradiction.
Yeah.
Right? Finally, I would just say about the example from Latin America, the example I would take from whatever was valuable about participatory budgeting, for instance, and I think we exaggerate what it did and what it amounted to, was that didn't come before the party. It was an orientation to organizing people by the party, including by the party when it got into government office at the local level. So it was given a certain direction and a purpose, and again, I think we're naive about thinking that, you know, we set up participatory structures, and out of that grows a disciplined cadre capable of going into the state and changing it.
Thank God.